So what we're about to dive into, it's a story about a myth getting completely shattered. And the best part? The proof doesn't come from some history book. Nope. It comes from the secret words of the very men who lived, and often died, believing that myth. Okay, so here's the official story, right? This was the party line. Before the war, Japanese propaganda painted this picture of the American soldier as, well, soft. They were supposedly morally weak, just fighting for a paycheck and a comfortable life. The idea was you put any real pressure on them and they just break. And none. Simple as that. But here's the thing. The real story was being quietly pieced together. There was this super secret unit, the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATIS for short. And these guys, they went through more than 2 million captured documents. We're talking diaries, letters, personal notebooks, all pulled from the uniforms of Japanese soldiers all over the Pacific. And as they translated pile after pile of these documents, something shocking started to show up. A pattern. And it led to this one huge question. What did these soldiers actually think? What were they scribbling down in their private diaries when they thought no one else on Earth would ever see it? See, you've got to understand, the whole Japanese war plan was built on this idea, this foundation of contempt. They genuinely believed a long, drawn-out war wasn't even on the table, because American willpower would just collapse. And this wasn't just talk, not just some poster on a wall. This was actual, official military doctrine. They even made it official in something called the Senjin-kun, which was their field service code. And it drilled one thing into every single soldier. Surrender is the absolute worst shame imaginable. And, by the way, you are morally superior to these Western guys. I mean, this shaped everything, their whole view of the world and exactly what they expected from the enemy. And then, August 1942, Guadalcanal. This is the moment where that neat, clean theory cooked up back in Tokyo just slams head-on into a messy, brutal, and completely unexpected reality. So the Japanese plan for Guadalcanal, it was a textbook case of overconfidence. I mean, their intelligence said there were maybe 2,000 Americans on the island. So they sent in this elite unit, the Ichiki detachment, with simple orders: attack right away. The expectation? The soft Americans would just fold like a cheap suit. Well, the reality was a catastrophe. There weren't 2,000 Marines, there were 11,000. And of Colonel Ichiki's 900 elite attackers, almost 800 of them were killed in one night. The entire assault wasn't just stopped, it was annihilated. And that's where you see the first real psychological shock. When they looked at the diaries from the guys who survived, they weren't filled with anger or hatred. They were filled with confusion, just total confusion. Everything they'd been taught, everything their training manuals promised, it was all wrong. The enemy just didn't act the way they were supposed to. And here's the thing, Guadalcanal wasn't some one-off, not a fluke. It was the start of a brand new, terrifying pattern. As the war grinded on to places like Tarawa and Saipan, that old myth of the soft American didn't just crack, it started to completely fall apart. Take Tarawa. The Japanese commander there was so confident in his defenses, he actually boasted 1 million men could not take Tarawa in 100 years. I mean, that tells you everything, right? It just shows how deep that belief in their own superiority and the enemy's weakness still was. But the diary fragments that they did find on Tarawa, whoa, they tell a very different story. The soldiers writing them were literally struggling to find the words for what they were witnessing. They saw Marines keep coming right over their own dead, and they didn't see it as bravery. To them, it was something inhuman, almost alien, a type of madness. It was like they were fighting men who had literally forgotten that retreat was an option. And all of this really comes to a head on Saipan. The Japanese forces, they're facing defeat, so they do the unthinkable. They launch the largest gyokosai, what we call a banzai charge, of the entire war. 4,000 men, soldiers and civilians, hurl themselves at the American lines. And the line did not break. Think about that. Their ultimate tactic, the one designed to shatter an enemy's spirit, it failed. It just broke against a wall of disciplined firepower. Okay, so after the absolute disasters of Guadalcanal and Saipan, the high command back in Tokyo finally had to face the music. The old playbook, it was dead. The time for contempt was over. Now it was time for a new, much grimmer kind of calculation. And this new strategy had a name: Jikyu-sen. Basically, attritional warfare. And check out this shift in thinking. The goal was no longer to break the American soldier on the battlefield. They finally realized, okay, that's impossible. The new goal? Hurt them so badly, inflict such unbelievable casualties, that the American public, the folks back home, would lose the will to keep fighting. Peleliu was the first big test of this new doctrine, and boy, was it brutally effective. Instead of making a stand on the beaches, the Japanese defenders pulled back into this insane network of fortified caves and tunnels. They turned the island's ridges into an absolute meat grinder. What was supposed to be a 4-day battle turned into 73 days of pure hell. And this is fascinating. In the diaries from Peleliu, a new word starts popping up. The word is kokugo. It means something like resolution or a deep acceptance of what's coming. And the Japanese soldiers, they used it to describe their own situation, their own fate. But, and this is huge, for the very first time, they started using it to describe the Marines they were fighting. This was the birth of respect. So this whole psychological journey we've been following, it all reaches its tragic climax on one island, Iwo Jima. And the man in charge there was a commander who, unlike all the others before him, had zero illusions about the enemy that was coming for him. This was Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. And he was different. See, he'd actually lived in the United States. He'd seen the car factories in Detroit with his own eyes. He knew America's industrial power was, in his words, beyond imagination. He studied every single after-action report on the Marines. He forbade bonsai charges. He knew the only way to fight was to make the Americans pay in blood for every single inch of volcanic rock. His orders were simple: dig in and die where you stand. And the result was a horrific testament to his strategy. Just look at the numbers. For the first and only time in a major battle in the Pacific, the number of American casualties, killed and wounded, was higher than the number of Japanese soldiers defending the island. Kuribayashi lost Iwo Jima, for sure, but he proved his terrible point about just how high the price of victory was going to be. And when you read the final diary entries pulled from the caves on Iwo Jima, it's chilling. All the old stuff, the contempt, the confusion, even the raw fear, it's all burned away. And what's left is this exhausted, crystal-clear recognition. They saw their enemy not as monsters, but almost as workers. Methodical, relentless men who had a job to do and were determined to see it finished no matter what it took. So that's the story those secret diaries told. It's this incredible 3-year evolution. You can literally trace it, from contempt in 1942, to total puzzlement in 43, to outright fear in 44, and finally, by 1945, to this grim, exhausted respect for an enemy they were just never, ever prepared to fight. So in the end, what was the biggest shock for the average Japanese soldier? It wasn't the Sherman tanks. It wasn't the endless fleets of ships or planes. It was the man himself. It was his will. They found themselves up against an opponent who, it turned out, could not be psychologically broken. An opponent who treated combat like a job. A terrible, bloody job, but one that was going to be finished, period. And all of this really leaves us with one last, pretty haunting question, doesn't it? In those final moments, sitting in a dark cave, maybe by the light of a single candle, what goes through a soldier's mind? What does he choose to write down when he finally understands that the one big idea his entire war was built on was a complete lie?